Okay.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. I want to welcome everybody to the Family Promise of the Verdugos next personal financial workshop, Deciphering Your Credit Report. We've talked quite a bit in the past several workshops about the effect of credit, the effect of debt, how to manage that properly. And today specifically, we're going to be looking at how to decipher your credit report. This is something that is always recommended that we be checking on a regular basis, at least once a year. And so oftentimes when we get that, we don't even know what to do with it. So we're going to walk through that this evening and talk about what impacts your credit, how to obtain your credit report. And then once you have that, how to review and read and ultimately decipher that credit report so that if there are errors, you would be able to go through the dispute process and get those things fixed and resolved. Because having a correct credit report or an up-to-date credit report is going to help you in larger purchases that you're needing to make, larger financing and so on. So you want to make sure that it's as accurate as possible. So tonight, here's what we're going to cover exactly. We're going to talk about what impacts our credit, what helps raise our scores, what helps lower our scores. How to obtain your credit report. Where do I actually get that from? There's so many different ways with technology to access that now. It should be very simple for us to get our fingers on that. Number 3, how to read and decipher that credit report. And number 4, how to resolve those errors on the credit report. Okay, so first, let's look at what impacts our credit. I get these types of questions all the time. What is good or not good in terms of how I manage my credit? Opening a new card, closing a card, having a credit check. What if I make late payments on my utility bills or things like that? People are always wondering, is that ultimately going to negatively impact my credit history, my credit report, and ultimately my credit score? But there are 5 things that generally hold the most weight when it comes to affecting our credit report and our credit history. The first one is our payment history. So your ability to make timely payments is probably one of the larger roles in affecting your credit score, okay? So lenders want to have confidence that you as a borrower are capable of paying back any debts on time. So one of the things that we want to look at when we check our credit report that future creditors may look at when you're asking for more credit is, have you been paying back these debts on time? Okay. So if there's ever going to be a situation where you know that you're not going to be able to make a payment, you're going to make a payment late, that is the best time to notify your lender as soon as possible, right? So especially now, especially during the pandemic, during COVID-19, if you're having to pause on making payments for budgetary reasons or something like that, you're going to want to avoid those negative marks on your credit report by contacting your lender first and saying, look, I may not be able to make a payment next month. So rather than just skipping the payment, actually communicating with them, because that payment history is so important. And as we're going to see later on, when we look at a sample credit report, we're going to be able to see, have we made timely payments each and every month? So the credit report is tracking that on each of our open lines of credit. The second thing that can impact our credit report is credit utilization. Okay, so in order to determine your credit usage, okay, is to simply divide the amount of credit that is currently in use by the amount of credit that you have available. Okay, so the amount of credit that we have available is the available credit limit, or the amount that we can borrow on each of our consumer credit cards. Okay, So for example, you may have a Visa card that has a $5,000 credit limit. So you can borrow up to on that card $5,000, right? So that is the total amount of credit available on that card. So add all those cards up, right? And if you don't know what you have in terms of a limit on a card, you can check with your lender, and you will also be able to see that as well in the credit report. So if you've forgotten, I really don't know if, am I maxed out on this card? Have I borrowed everything that I can? Am I up to the limit? We'll be able to see that on the credit report. And we divide that, right? We divide what we're currently using by that total amount. So let's say on that card, we can borrow up to 5,000, but we have only used 2,000 of it, right? Meaning we're still paying back 2,000 of that $5,000 limit. We divide 2,000 by the $5,000 available limit, right? And that gives us what's called our credit utilization percentage. So the rule of thumb, and we've talked about rules of thumb before, is that rules of thumb are just general guidelines. They don't apply to everybody's situation. But the general rule of thumb is to keep our credit utilization percentage under 30%. Right? So we've talked about other ratios like debt to income ratio. And we've tried to keep that under a certain percentage, right? Because we don't want to overborrow. We don't want to max ourselves out and just be drowning in debt. So when it comes to credit utilization, we don't want to utilize more than 30% of what is available to us, right? So if you have 5 credit cards and you find that you're maxed out, you borrowed up to the maximum balance on all of them, your credit utilization is 100%, right? So there's no available amount to borrow. You can put nothing else on those cards until you've made payments, right? So if you're above 30%, that you may be over borrowing. You may be putting too much on credit cards, okay? Why is this credit utilization so important? Do you have to be tracking it all the time? No. But if you're going to check your credit report at least once a year, which is the going rule, you should at least just do some basic math on your credit utilization. How much of the total limit am I borrowing? Because if you ask for future credit, okay, they're going to look at that percentage and say, wow, this person is maxed out. They're utilizing 80% of their available balances. Why would we want to be willing to give them more to borrow, and then potentially they might not be able to pay us back, right? So if you're keeping that number under 30%, it's more likely that a new creditor is going to say, yeah, we're willing to give this person a new card because they're showing that they're utilizing what they have open in a responsible way. And they're probably going to say, all right, you're less of a risk and we'd be more willing to give you credit. Length of credit history. So lenders will take into account all of the open lines of credit and how long you've had each of these accounts open. That's something that they look at, right? So when people ask me, right, should I close this particular credit card? Generally, my answer is no, right? So don't go cutting up your credit cards if you've paid them off. You've shown that you've paid them off, so simply put them somewhere. Put them in the freezer, put them in a dresser drawer, in a sock, whatever it is to hide it from yourself so you don't use it, right? But keeping it open, right, allows creditors to see that you've had these lines of credit open, you've paid them, and then you've kept them open. You're not closing a bunch of accounts, right? So length of credit history is extremely important. So don't go rushing to closing the accounts. Just keep them at arm's length from yourself. Credit mix, okay? Creditors are also going to look at your credit report to see what is the mix of your borrowing. Do you have car loans? Do you have private student loan debt that's on your credit report? Do you have a mortgage? Do you have consumer credit cards? Are they from department stores? Or are they from some of the major credit card companies, Visa, MasterCard, Discover, American Express, and so on? Okay, so lenders view a diverse mix of credit as actually favorable because you're managing different types of credit. So they would rather see that than 10 credit cards, right? So if you have a car payment, if you have a student loan payment, if you have a couple of credit cards, that looks better, okay? So you've probably heard this before. Another good rule of thumb is the way to utilize that credit mix is to charge a small amount to certain credit cards each month, pay it off in full. Don't let interest accrue, right? And not only does it not impact your score negatively, but it can help move your score up because it impacts it positively. And at the same time, you're helping yourself because you're creating positive habits, right? Good money habits. Small charges, you pay it off, no interest accrues, right? So if you had a period of time where you had a long, maybe string of missed payments, late payments, you maxed out a card, and maybe you brought it back down to zero. A good way to start utilizing that credit again is make those small charges, buy a couple of things that you know you can pay off at the next bill and pay it off. So that's the good news, is that if you've struggled with making credit payments in the past, you can always start over again, develop new habits by making these timely monthly payments on smaller charges, okay? And the last thing that's going to impact your credit report and your credit score is new credit. So anytime you apply for credit, you're giving lenders the right to obtain copies of your credit report from a credit bureau, right? So when they do that, right, depending on the creditor, it's called a soft inquiry, or it could be a hard inquiry. So this is another frequent question I get is, do certain types of inquiries adversely affect my credit score? Right. Soft inquiries do not have an impact on your score. Okay. So for example, you going and checking your own credit report, or a potential employer, right, pulling your credit report, you going and filling out a rent application, right, and a potential landlord checks your credit. Those are all examples of soft inquiries, right? Applying for a new credit card, requesting a credit limit increase, financing a car, purchasing a home. Those are hard inquiries. Those are bigger sort of credit checks, right? Because in those situations, you're asking to borrow more, right? So for an employer or a potential landlord, or you just checking your credit report, that's a soft inquiry. You're not really asking to borrow money. You're just trying to show proof of a good credit history. That's a soft inquiry. It's not going to impact. But if you're actually looking to take on a mortgage, buy a new car, increasing your balance on a credit card, you're asking to borrow larger sums of money, that's going to be a hard inquiry. Okay. The other thing that you have to sort of be mindful of too with new credit is the number of inquiries. So if they see, okay, you have some soft inquiries, but you had 10 of them last week, that could potentially be a red flag. Why was there a need for 10 different, credit checks last week? I understand you may be hunting for an apartment or something. but if you did a couple of them last week, that makes sense, right? So the number of inquiries more often than not relates to retail store credit cards. That's what's gonna bring up a red flag, is when they see all these credit inquiries for a Target card, a Macy's card, some sort of department store, right? That then looks like somebody is going around trying to find credit in different locations, right? To a lender, that's going to be a red flag. Where can you get your credit report? There's 3 agencies that can provide us with our credit report. So these are the traditional Experian, TransUnion, Equifax. And you can go, as you can see there on the screen, you can go directly to their websites and you can get your credit report. You're entitled to 1 free one per year. So people ask me, Brian, is one credit bureau better than another? It's not necessarily that they're better than another. It's that you're going to find that your credit report is going to be different from one to the next. And that's why you may want to do several credit report checks throughout the year to compare them. Shouldn't they all have the same information? Yeah, it would make sense that they would, but they don't. So the fact of the matter is that depending on the creditors, the lenders, and where these credit bureaus are getting their information from, you could have varying reports between the 3, right? So Experian could be reporting one list of credit history and giving you one score, and Equifax could give you something different, right? So I just wanted to give you that little bit of a disclosure that you may find some difference, some variation between the 3. Now, if you don't want to go directly to those credit bureaus, you can go to a website like annualcreditreport.com, where all 3 of them are integrated into their one system, right? So it's not that they combine all the information, but you can access those 3 through that one website. So if you don't want to go bouncing all around between 3 different websites, you can just go to annualcreditreport.com. Some of you may have access to your credit report, and this is something I didn't put on this slide because people's situations are so completely different and who they bank with is different. But certain credit cards that you may have, Discover Card, for example, has the ability for you to access your credit report. Individuals' banks allow them to have access to a credit report. It's one of the benefits of banking with your particular bank. So you may have access to your credit report without having to go to annualcreditreport.com or any of the 3 bureaus, right? So I get that. You may have a feature in your banking app where you can, you can go and check your credit report, boom, right there on your phone. Great, more power to you, use it. So I just wanted to mention that that could be available to you as well. So let's say that we got our credit report in front of us now. We got it from one of these sites, we got it from our bank, from somewhere, right? And now we got to figure out how to decipher this thing and how to read it. Here's what we're going to be looking for, right? 1, we're going to want to make sure that all of our personal information is correct. Why? Well, in this day and age of technology, we've seen that even with these credit bureaus, our personal identity is not safe, right? So it's very easy for someone to get a hold of our social security number, our date of birth, any of our personal identifying information, and create a fictitious version of us, if not act as us, right? So for example, you may pull your credit report and see that you are listed with your first and last name, but in a middle initial that is not yours, All somebody had to do was get a hold of your personal information and create a sort of different version of you by having that different middle initial, right? So the very first thing to check is on your credit report is make sure all your personal identifiers, your personal information, your contacts, your address, all your name, all of that is correct. Okay. You're going to want to obviously look for any accounts that are in bad or poor standing, any adverse accounts. You're going to want to look for accounts that aren't even yours. And unfortunately, those pop up on credit reports quite often, right? But see, those people who aren't checking their credit report, that just flies under their radar. They don't even know. So I have people telling me all the time, I just looked at my credit report for the first time in some time, and there's like accounts I didn't even know I had. Well, yeah, somebody opened them in your name. Oftentimes too, credit card companies can make errors, right? So we want to look for that. Is this a valid account? Is this even my account? Sometimes people will find open lines of credit that they've paid off and they're still showing as open, balances due, sent to collections, and you've already paid that. So we want to look for that as well. We want to review our accounts that are actually in good standing, that we have been paying off on time, and just make sure that everything looks correct, right? We want to look at things like credit checks. How many soft inquiries have I had on my credit report this year? How many hard inquiries? Does that make sense with what I've actually done? Okay, so let's actually look at a sample. I'm going to try to pull up a sample here on the screen so we could see. Give me just a sec. Let's see if I can do this here. Here we go.
Hi, Camille, by the way. Hi.
So I'm going to have to probably screen share again. And here we go. Let's see if this comes up.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yep, it's up.
Okay, perfect. So here's an example of an Experian credit report. Okay, this is for John Consumer. He just pulled this credit report. You would have your name at the top, your credit report number, the date you pulled it. And obviously the way this is set up here is you can see each section of the credit report across the top, from your personal information to personal statements. They even identify potentially negative situations, accounts in good standing, whether you've taken or had any credit inquiries, and they even have a cart for disputes, right? So before, when we had to actually go and contact our lenders, we had to contact the credit bureau, we had to do all this over the phone. We can actually initiate a dispute right here in these electronic versions of our credit report. And just like you would shopping at Amazon or something, you put a dispute in the cart and you submit it, and then it goes directly to the bureau and to the lender, and then it starts getting processed. So we could see that John Consumer has no disputes in his cart. That's good. Hopefully everything looks correct on his credit report, right? So the first thing that we're going to see here is under his personal information, there's a couple of different names that are associated with his credit report, right? And over on the right-hand side, the Experian report gives him the ability to dispute if he never goes by J Consumer, right? Or he doesn't have any accounts in JON Consumer, right? So that's something, like I was mentioning before, you want to check. Are there accounts open with my first and last name, but a different middle initial, a different spelling of my last name? Those small tweaks can easily fly under the radar, which is why we want to be checking this, right? If we look below the name, addresses associated with your credit report, right? Making sure that, hey, wait a second, my address is really 1475, right, on Main Street. Why is there a 1036 apartment 143? I've never lived at that address. That could be something that John Consumer could dispute, right? So the credit bureau and his lenders would look into, how did that come up on his credit report, right? And if it's not valid, that could be fixed. Again, here, we could look at social security numbers, right? We could dispute those. Your date of birth, any spouse, or if you've ever had a co-applicant for any sort of credit, right? All of that can be double checked. In this Experian report, the next thing that we see here is they start listing any potentially negative accounts that John Consumer has. So for each account, we can look to see, okay, here's my account name, there's the account number. I can look at my recent balance, when that card was opened, right? What kind of card it is, like we were talking about before, what is my actual limit on this card, right? What's my monthly payment? What is currently due? Oh, and this is why for John Consumer, this is a potentially negative item. If you notice there's a past due amount of $20. Something nice here that Experian does on this particular report is, look, you can see his payment history in that nice little graphic account history below. We're going all the way back to 2010. We see every single month is green because he made an on-time payment. But look what's happening recently on this report. The most recent or current date, May 30th of 2015, it's yellow because he's in danger of this past due amount going, what, 30 days, right? So if that goes beyond 30 days, it's going to go red. Now it's not even going to be a potentially negative item. It's going to be a negative item, right? So that's something you want to check for each of your lines is, what does that account history, my payment history look like? We said that was like one of the big factors in impacting your credit score is that account history. So underneath that, it says, look, 30 days past due. If we go into June of 2000, if we go into the next month, right, this account is going to be past due. So this potentially negative is a warning to John Consumer, right? Hopefully he already knows that. Hopefully he's tracking his payments and knows he's late on that. Just below that, we have an account in good standing, right? Look at all the green all the way across. Every single month he's making timely payments, right? We have another one just below that for American Apartments. Still making good payments. Below that, we can see if we had any credit inquiries. Inquiries shared with others, meaning was the credit report accessed for information to be shared with a potential lender, a potential creditor? He's had no inquiries, right? He had one way back in 2013, right? Where Experian accessed his credit report. Well, that was him. That was probably him checking his credit report through Experian back in 2013. So we said you checking your credit report is just a soft inquiry, but it's going to be listed, right? So a creditor is not going to have a problem with that. They're just going to say, oh, okay, good. Somebody from this credit bureau is taking a look at that, right? But if John Consumer had applied for a visa in the last month, it would show under inquiry shared with others. Okay. So below that is all the disclosures and how to get in contact with the credit bureaus to fix certain things. But in this case, he could just dispute using his dispute card. So if we go back, I'm just going to close this screen and let's see if we can go back to our slides. Wrong button, Brian. There we go.
All right.
So if you see negative things on your credit report, what would be the reason to dispute it? And how do I go about actually making that dispute? Is it just as simple as putting it in the cart? Not necessarily, right? So we've obtained the credit report. Now let's determine whether we should dispute it or not. Here's when you should dispute. You have incorrect personal information. Your name, your social security number, your address. Those things can be easily resolved. Yeah, we got to dispute that. We definitely have to dispute it because somebody could be using our identity. We want to stop that. We want to dispute if you carry a balance that you've already settled. Hey, I paid that off. Or I'm not behind on that. I'm current. I have bank statements to prove I made those payments. So maybe the creditor is not recording it correctly. That's another reason to dispute. You find duplicate information. I only have one Visa. Why is there 3 of them for the same account? Sometimes we can see that happening. You go to log into your credit report and there's multiple reports. So you have duplicate credit reports. And then of course, you definitely want to dispute if you have fraudulent items on the report, right? You have a new credit card or a loan that you most certainly know you did not open. So all 3 crediting agencies, once you decide you're going to dispute, right, you can file through the credit bureau. You can file through those 3 credit bureaus.
You have to, Brian, do you have to file with each of the, like with every single one of them, or like, can you just file once and then it'll get taken care of?
Good question. So
Okay.
you should be able to file with one and it should be fixed on the whole on your credit report.
Okay.
So that whether it's Experian, Equifax, or TransUnion, it will be fixed on the whole. But what I would suggest you do is that if you do dispute it and it does get resolved and fixed, that you check the other credit bureaus. Because you don't want, I don't know, you go down to purchase a new car and they check through Equifax and it's not resolved.
Right. Okay.
So that is the simplest and easiest way, is to go through the credit bureaus. They have their own dispute forms on their website that you can fill out. In Experian's case, we do that right there with the click of a button. We dispute that line item. It goes into the cart. We end up submitting it, right? The other method to use, if you're not going to do it through the credit bureau, is to actually dispute it going directly to the source. Okay, so you're going to go to the lender, you're going to go to the bank, you're going to go to the credit card company or collection agency about that misreported information. Now, if you do it that way, the source, the lender, is supposed to or is required to report the dispute to each of the 3 credit bureaus. So that goes back to your question, Christina.
Yeah.
It could be easier and save some time and make your job a little easier if you do it through the furnisher, you do it through the lender, because they're then required to report it to
Right.
us. So if you file with the source, though, it's not going to be as easy as clicking the dispute button.
Right.
You're going to have to call them or go on their site and figure out their process. So you're going to have to contact them. They're either going to direct you to a link, give you a site, or in some cases, they might, to delay it, just send actual hard copy forms in the mail. And then you got to send them back. It's just to give them time in processing all that stuff. Right? So it slows down the flow of work that they have to do. So it might be more of a headache to do it directly through the lender. Right? So what you may want to try to do is report or dispute the error through one of the bureaus first. So then that begs the follow-up question. Does disputing a credit report hurt my credit score? Right? Because sometimes people are like, I don't want more companies poking around in there, and then that's going to ding me, right? No, credit disputes do not hurt your credit score. When an item is being investigated, the credit bureaus notate this on your credit report with a code. And that code is XB. So you could even dispute something, go back into your credit report and check, is there an XB code on that line item? Okay, that signals to the lenders that the item is under review and that they should not actually consider that item in their evaluation of your credit. So depending on the outcome of your dispute, your credit score could be adjusted to reflect the updated and fixed information, right? That's what we want. So if a negative item is removed, that dispute improves your score, okay? So what you want to make sure is that if the credit bureau says it's been resolved, that you actually follow up and check your credit report again to make sure that it's been fixed. So if you go to the source and to the lender to fix the error, make sure that you get something in writing proving or documenting from their end that they have technically fixed it. That way you have something, right? So don't take the lender's word at it like over the phone that, oh yeah, that's fixed. And then you go back into your credit report and it's still a negative item. Get something in writing from them. Any questions?
Camille, anything?
All right. With technology, it's become easier and easier. We have easier access to the credit report. It's now, instead of pages and pages of documentation, right, that we would have to print out, it's now very easily accessible on a screen. And as we saw there in that example, it's easy to dispute. Whereas before, we would have to go on this long journey to call and provide evidence and documentation, and we can get the dispute process going very quickly, right? So please make sure that you're reviewing your credit report on a regular basis. One, if anything, it's just going to keep you on top of what you're borrowing, your payment history, your credit utilization. And then two, you're just making sure that everything is accurate and is as it should be. And nobody else's nonsense is ruining your credit history and score. So thank you guys so much for coming in tonight. I appreciate it. I hope some of the information was valuable to you. If you still have more questions or you have something specific to your scenario or situation, get in contact with Christina. We can facilitate one-on-one meetings over Zoom where you can ask specific questions. You can get those questions to Christina in an email. All that to say we're here to help you with your specific household situation.
Thank you for coming, Camille.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you. Take
All
care.
right.
Bye.
Bye.